Independence Day is directed by Roland Emmerich, co-written by him and Dean Devlin, and stars Bill Pullman, Jeff Goldblum, Will Smith, and Randy Quaid. And in Independence Day, to make a long story short, alien ships position themselves around the Earth and destroy major cities. Now, a whole lot of people have to work together to figure out how to beat the aliens and survive. Now, of course, I am reviewing this movie because Independence Day Resurgence came out I don't know how long ago, and I watched it, and we'll talk about that later. But if you have never seen the original Independence Day, you owe it to yourself to see this movie, especially if you're a big fan of action blockbusters, because Independence Day is the ultimate nostalgic 90s cheese fest blockbuster. And you know what? Rewatching this movie for this review, it's still ridiculously fun. It still holds up for the most part visually, although it is admittedly a very shallow movie. Now, Independence Day is widely regarded as the best thing that Roland Emmerich has ever done, and for good reason. The way he stages his scenes of destruction in this movie are just done so well. His dogfights are really still impressive to this day. It's all very exciting. The destruction still has like this dark edge to it. But overall, what Roland Emmerich does for this film is that he injects it with this just rousing sort of inspirational tone that never really takes itself that seriously. And you can see this as well in the writing, because while rewatching this movie, I was surprised at how much I was laughing. There's so much witty one-liners and whatnot here. But even with the wittiness, the script still allows for some serious moments, like, of course, Bill Pullman's famous like presidential speech. And the reason why all of this works is because all these characters are just so likable. There's an everyman quality to each and every one of them, especially, well, including the President of the United States, who at first, you might not be able to relate to, but they all boil them down to these basic human qualities. And one thing I never noticed as a kid, but I noticed while rewatching this movie, is that Independence Day employs this really simple but clever 3-act structure. They go from July 2 to July 4. In July 2, they have all these separate characters, then by July 3, they bring them together. July 4, they take on the aliens, and it's again, like I said, it's very simple, but it's clever. And let's talk about some of those characters. First of all, you have Jeff Goldblum in this movie, who is he was at peak Goldblum in this era. Mid-90s was Jeff Goldblum era, and he's really funny, but he also makes for a weirdly endearing leading man. And I know a lot of people today say that they didn't really like the more eccentric characters in Independence Day, but I always really liked Randy Quaid and Judd Hirsch and Brent Spiner. But let me tell you, the number one best thing about Independence Day has to be Will Smith. Just like Jeff Goldblum, this was peak Will Smith era. He's so charismatic. Whenever he's on screen, you just feel safe. He's so fun to watch, but at the same time, you can tell he's not just having fun on set. He's actually acting, and you can tell in how he interacts with the other characters. And by the time the movie focuses up in the second act, all these different character arcs come together and get really balanced out, and you get this epic feel from every single point of view. And from this point forward, the pacing never lets up, and there's so much tension and excitement. We also have to touch on just how good this movie still looks even 20 years after its release. It honestly looks better than Independence Day Resurgence, which we will talk about in another video. In fact, I don't think people remember that Independence Day actually won an Oscar for visual effects back in 1997, and for good reason. Again, the scenes of destruction look so impressive because of how they blended practical effects with CGI. They really built like these miniature buildings, then blew them up, then slowed down the explosions for the movie. The dogfights in comparison are a bit dated, but they're still impressive to watch. And overall, all the alien stuff is just so well designed, because you don't really get to see the inner workings of the aliens that much in this movie, but you get a sense of how they work and you remember them. And I really just miss the days of practical slimy aliens, because they're always going to look creepier and better than any CGI creation. The sound isn't quite as impressive as the visuals here, but they still get the job done, especially the score by David Arnold, which is also very rousing. I've been using that word a lot, rousing, but while this movie has that tone, Roland Emmerich it really doesn't go that deep here. What I mean is that there are certain scenes where you get to see other countries taking on the aliens, but even with these other countries, it just feels so American. These scenes with the other countries just feel so obligatory. They try to make this message about how humanity can come together to fight a common threat, but they just don't earn that. The female characters also could have been better in this movie. I mean, they do have some depth to them, but by the end of the movie, they're really just kicked to the back seat. And the one thing that all Independence Day fans will admit is bad is the solution they come up with to defeat the aliens. It's really ridiculous, it's really cheap, it's really easy, and it comes comes off like a deus ex machina. And the first act of the movie is pretty uneven, you know, whenever there's not destruction happening, you just want to get back to the destruction. And the last negative I have might anger some people, but I never really liked Bill Pullman as the president. I think he's too stoic. I think they needed someone with more expressiveness. And let's be honest, his big speech, while it's cool and memorable, it's pretty hollow. It doesn't really mean anything. In the end, objectively speaking, I will say that Independence Day is an okay movie, but subjectively speaking, it is one of the most fun blockbusters ever made, and you, again, have to see it if you haven't yet. Alright, so those are my thoughts on Independence Day. Have you guys seen it? What do you think about it? Whether you agree with me or not, please leave me a comment. Let's have a conversation.